Security, get her out. She's not on the list. The words cracked through the rooftop like a thunderclap, sharp enough to cut through the soft hum of jazz and the clink of crystal glasses. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Heads turned. A few phones subtly lifted. And at the center of it all stood Naomi Carter, still, composed, dressed in a simple black dress that carried no logos, no labels, no signals of the power she held. She didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She just looked at the man who had decided, in less than 5 seconds, that she didn't belong. The skyline stretched behind her, city lights flickering like witnesses to a moment that was about to shift. The event was exclusive, invite-only, curated, the kind of place where wealth whispered instead of shouted. But tonight, the whisper had turned into judgment. Naomi had walked in alone. No assistant. No entourage. No designer clutch announcing her arrival. Just quiet confidence and a name that no one bothered to check twice. The woman at the check-in table had scanned her once, then again, her lips tightening just enough to signal doubt. A glance was exchanged, a subtle shake of the head, and then the call was made. That's when the manager stepped in. Tall, polished, smiling the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, this is a private event," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something colder. "We can't have unverified guests walking in." Unverified. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Naomi tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition. She had heard that tone before. Years ago, in a conference room where her pitch was dismissed before it was heard. In a lobby where her name was questioned despite being printed clearly on the reservation. Different place. Same energy. She exhaled slowly, her breath steady, controlled, as if she had practiced this moment 100 times. Around her, the crowd shifted. Some watched openly now. Others pretended not to. A man in a navy suit leaned closer to his date and whispered something that made her glance twice at Naomi's outfit. A woman near the bar lifted her phone just slightly, pretending to check a message while angling the camera. The air wasn't calm anymore. It was charged. The kind of tension that doesn't need volume to be loud. The security guard stepped forward then, not aggressive, but certain. Certain that he was doing the right thing. Certain that she was in the wrong place. His hand hovered just enough to signal what would come next. And still, Naomi didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him, then past him, scanning the room like someone taking inventory of a situation already under control. Her silence wasn't hesitation. It was timing. And somewhere in that silence, something began to shift, though no one could name it yet. Because what they saw was a woman being removed. But what they failed to see was who she really was. The guard's hand did not land, but it did not need to. The message had already been delivered. Naomi could feel the weight of every eye in the room, measuring her, sorting her, placing her somewhere beneath the polished surface of this event. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound polite, while making sure everyone nearby could still hear. "We are trying to avoid a scene," he said, though his presence had already created one. Naomi's gaze did not waver. She studied him the way one studies a detail that does not quite fit, not with anger, but with precision. "Then perhaps you should start by checking your facts," she replied, her tone even, controlled, carrying farther than a raised voice ever could. A few heads turned more sharply now. The woman near the bar stopped pretending to scroll. The man in the navy suit straightened, sensing something shifting beneath the surface. But the manager only smiled, a thin, rehearsed expression. "We have already checked," he said, "and your name is not on our list." The word list echoed, as if it held authority beyond question. Naomi let a second pass, just long enough for the silence to stretch. She had learned that silence could expose more than any argument. Around her, the energy in the room tightened. Conversations had not resumed. They had only lowered, turning into murmurs that circled her like quiet judgment. The guard shifted his stance, waiting for a signal. The manager gave a small nod, subtle but clear. It was time to move her out. That was when Naomi moved for the first time, not backward, not in retreat, but forward, a single step that changed the distance between them. It was small, almost invisible, but it reset the space. "Run it again," she said, not as a request, but as a statement. The manager hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. It was the first crack. He covered it quickly with a dismissive shake of his head. Ma'am, we are not going to keep repeating the same process. Naomi's eyes flicked briefly to the check-in tablet, then back to him. That is interesting, she said softly, because the last time someone said that to me, they ended up correcting themselves. The words landed differently now. Not defensive, not emotional. Certain. The kind of certainty that did not need proof in the moment because it already had it somewhere else. The guard glanced at the manager, uncertain now, reading a shift he could not fully explain. The woman filming lowered her phone slightly, leaning in instead. The air felt heavier, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Naomi reached into her pocket, then, slow, deliberate, pulling out her phone. Not rushed, not reactive, intentional. Her thumb hovered over the screen for just a second before she tapped. Stay right there, the manager said quickly, mistaking the movement for compliance, for a call to leave. Naomi did not look at him. She lifted the phone to her ear, her voice calm, almost quiet, but every word carried. Yes, she said, we have a situation. And just like that, the balance of the room began to tilt, though no one understood yet how far it was about to fall. The call did not sound dramatic. It did not need to. Naomi's voice stayed level, almost quiet, but there was something in the way she spoke that made the words land differently. On the other end, a woman responded immediately, sharp, efficient, already aware that tone meant escalation. Naomi did not explain everything. She did not have to. Initiate sponsor review, she said, her eyes still fixed ahead, not on the manager, not on the guard, but somewhere beyond them, as if she was already looking at the outcome instead of the moment. A brief pause followed, not from hesitation, but from confirmation. All of them, the voice asked. Naomi answered without blinking. All of them. Effective now. The words were simple, but the effect began instantly, even if no one in the room could see it yet. The manager let out a short laugh, the kind people use when they think they understand a situation better than they do. Calling someone is not going to change anything, he said, folding his arms now, more confident than before, as if her calmness confirmed his assumption that she had no real authority. Naomi ended the call slowly, lowering the phone with the same measured control she had shown since the moment she walked in. She turned her head slightly, taking in the room again. The skyline behind her seemed sharper now, the lights no longer soft, but cutting, like the truth about to surface. You are right, she said, her voice steady. It will not change anything. The manager smirked, already preparing to signal the guard again. But Naomi continued, just enough to stop him mid-gesture. It will reveal everything. That was when the first ripple hit, subtle, almost invisible. Near the bar, a man in a tailored gray suit glanced down at his phone, his expression shifting from casual interest to confusion. A second later, a woman beside him checked hers too, her brows pulling together as she read something that clearly did not match the evening's tone. The music did not stop, but it faltered, just slightly, as if even the rhythm sensed the disruption. The manager noticed the shift, but misread it, assuming it was still about the scene in front of him. Ma'am, this is your last chance, he said, his voice firmer now, louder, reclaiming authority that was already slipping. You need to leave. Naomi looked at him then, directly, fully, for the first time since the call ended. And in that look, something changed. It was not anger. It was not frustration. It was recognition. The kind that comes when a pattern repeats one time too many. 17 minutes, she said quietly. The number sounded out of place, disconnected from the conversation, but it landed with weight. The manager frowned, thrown off balance for a fraction of a second. What? Naomi did not explain. She did not need to. Because across the room, more phones were lighting up. Conversations were no longer whispers. They were questions now. Quick, uncertain, spreading. The guard lowered his hand slightly, instinct overriding instruction. And somewhere beneath the surface of the event, something much larger than one misunderstanding had already begun to unravel. The shift was no longer subtle. It moved through the rooftop like a quiet current turning into a wave. One guest stepped away from the bar, phone in hand, scanning the room as if trying to locate the source of whatever had just disrupted the night. Another guest frowned at his screen, then looked toward the stage where the event branding glowed in soft gold light, now suddenly feeling less certain, less permanent. Naomi stood exactly where she had been, unmoved, as if the ground beneath her belonged to her long before anyone else arrived. The manager noticed the change this time, but he could not control it. His confidence thinned, just enough to expose the uncertainty underneath. "What is going on?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. The guard beside him shifted again, no longer stepping forward, no longer certain of the direction he had been given. Naomi watched it unfold with the same calm she had carried from the beginning. Her silence was no longer mistaken for weakness. It was starting to feel like control. Across the room, a woman in a white blazer spoke quietly into her phone, her voice tight with urgency. "Are you seeing this update?" she asked, her eyes flicking between the screen and the event around her. A man beside her nodded slowly, his expression no longer relaxed. "Sponsors are pulling out," he said under his breath, the words barely audible but heavy enough to ripple outward. The phrase moved faster than any announcement could. Sponsors. Pulling out. It did not belong in a room like this. Not tonight. Not at an event built on image, precision, and carefully curated power. The manager heard it then. He turned sharply, scanning the crowd, trying to locate the source, trying to regain control of a narrative that was slipping away from him in real time. "That is not possible," he said, louder now, forcing certainty into his voice. But the room was no longer listening to him. Phones continued to light up. Conversations overlapped. The polished calm of the evening fractured into something raw, something real. Naomi took a slow breath, her gaze lifting slightly toward the skyline again. For a brief moment, the noise around her faded, replaced by a memory that moved through her with quiet clarity. A smaller room. Years ago. A different kind of event. She had stood at the entrance then too, dressed carefully. Prepared, ready. And still, she had been told the same thing. "You do not belong here." Back then, she had stepped away. Back then, she had accepted the door closing. But she had not forgotten it. Not once. The memory did not bring anger. It brought alignment. It reminded her exactly why she built what she built, exactly why moments like this were never accidents. They were patterns, and patterns could be ended. The present rushed back in as the manager stepped closer again, his composure now visibly strained. "If this is some kind of stunt," he said, his voice tighter than before, "it ends now." Naomi turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes with a calm that no longer needed to explain itself. "It already ended," she said. "You just have not caught up yet." And somewhere behind him, the event screens flickered for just a second, as if even the foundation of the night was beginning to respond to a truth that could no longer be contained. The flicker on the event screens did not last long, but it was enough. Enough to pull every eye toward the glowing displays that had, just moments ago, projected nothing but polished branding and curated prestige. Now, the images hesitated, stuttered, as if the system itself was trying to catch up with a reality it had not been prepared to show. A low murmur rolled across the rooftop, no longer contained, no longer polite. Guests turned fully now, no longer pretending disinterest. Whatever this was, it had moved beyond a misunderstanding at the door. It was something else, something bigger. The manager followed their gaze, his posture tightening as he tried to regain control of a room that no longer responded to his presence. "Ignore that," he said quickly, too quickly, his voice cutting through the noise but failing to command it. Technical issue. But no one returned to their conversations. No one picked their glasses back up. Because at the center of it all, Naomi Carter had not moved. She stood exactly where she had been told she did not belong, her presence now anchoring the entire space. A man near the stage stepped back as his phone buzzed again, this time louder, more insistent. He looked down, then up, his expression shifting from confusion to something closer to realization. "It is real," he said, not loudly, but clearly enough for the words to carry. "They are suspending contracts." The phrase landed harder this time. Not rumor, not speculation. Action. Immediate. Unfolding. The manager's face changed then, the confidence draining in a way he could not hide. He turned back to Naomi, searching her expression for any sign that this was a bluff, a performance, anything he could dismiss. But there was nothing to dismiss. She was not reacting to the chaos. She was ahead of it. "What did you do?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could reshape it into authority. Naomi held his gaze, her expression steady, unshaken by the tension that now filled every inch of the rooftop. I did exactly what you said I could not, she replied. I changed everything. Behind him, the event screens shifted again, this time not flickering, but updating. The sponsor logos that had framed the evening began to disappear one by one, fading out like lights being turned off in a building that was closing down early. A collective breath moved through the crowd, sharp and synchronized. This was no longer contained. This was visible, irreversible. The guard took a step back without realizing it, his earlier certainty gone, replaced by something quieter, something more cautious. The manager did not move. He could not, because the moment had turned, and he knew it. Naomi glanced briefly toward the screens, then back at him, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of everything now unfolding. 17 minutes, she said again, softer this time. That is all it took. And as the final sponsor logo disappeared from the screen, the room understood something all at once that no one had been willing to see before. She had never been trying to get in. She had been deciding whether this place deserved to keep going at all. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before it. Not the polite silence of a curated event, but the kind that settles when truth finally surfaces and no one knows where to stand. The rooftop no longer felt exclusive. It felt exposed. Naomi Carter stood at the center of it, unchanged, as if everything unfolding around her had already been decided long before she arrived. The manager opened his mouth, then closed it again, the words he had relied on minutes earlier no longer available to him. His authority had not just slipped. It had been removed piece by piece, right in front of everyone. This cannot be happening, he said finally, his voice lower now, no longer projecting, no longer commanding. But the room did not respond to him. It responded to the screens, to the phones, to the quiet confirmations spreading from one guest to another. Contracts paused. Funding frozen. Partnerships withdrawn. Each update landed like a quiet verdict, undeniable and final. A woman near the front stepped back slowly, her heels clicking against the floor as she looked around, trying to understand how a single moment at the entrance had unraveled an entire event. A man beside her shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. This is not just a guest, he said. This is control. The word lingered. Control. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, not out of discomfort, but intention. For the first time, she stepped fully forward into the space that had tried to reject her, her presence no longer questioned, no longer filtered through assumptions. The guard moved aside without being asked, not out of fear, but recognition. Recognition that the situation had changed, and so had his place in it. The manager noticed that movement, and it hit him harder than the screens, harder than the phones, harder than the silence. Because it meant the room had already chosen. Naomi stopped just a few feet in front of him, close enough that he could no longer pretend distance gave him control. You built this entire moment on a list, she said, her voice calm, steady, each word landing with precision. A list you trusted more than judgment, more than respect, more than basic awareness. He swallowed, his composure slipping in small, visible ways. We followed protocol, he replied, the phrase sounding weaker now, as if it no longer held the weight it once did. Naomi tilted her head slightly, not dismissive, but exact. No, she said. You followed assumption. The difference settled into the space between them, sharp and undeniable. Around them, the crowd had gone completely still, no longer whispering, no longer questioning. Just watching. Because this was no longer about entry. It was about exposure. Naomi glanced once more at the screens, now stripped of the branding that had defined the night, then back at the manager. You thought you were protecting the integrity of this event, she continued. But all you did was reveal what it actually stands on. The words did not rise in volume, but they carried farther than anything said that night. The manager looked around, searching for support, for structure, for anything that still made sense. But there was nothing left to hold on to. The structure had already shifted, and Naomi Carter had not raised her voice once. The words did not echo, but they stayed. They settled into the air like something permanent, something that could not be undone or rephrased. Naomi Carter stood there, calm and unshaken, while the entire rooftop adjusted around her, not by choice, but by realization. The manager took a step back, subtle but visible, as if distance might restore some sense of control. It did not. It only made the shift more obvious. A voice from the crowd broke the silence, not loud, but clear enough to carry. Who is she? The question moved quickly, passed from one guest to another, reshaping the room in real time. Phones were no longer just checking updates. They were searching. Names, faces, context, something to match the authority they were now witnessing. A man near the center of the crowd stared at his screen, then looked up again, his expression changing in a way that could not be hidden. Naomi Carter, he said slowly, as if confirming it out loud made it more real. She is the primary backer. The words landed harder than anything before. Primary, not a guest, not a participant, a foundation. The manager froze, the meaning catching up to him all at once. His eyes moved from Naomi to the screens, to the crowd, then back to her again, as if hoping the connection would not fully form. But it already had. Naomi did not react to the recognition. She did not nod. She did not confirm. She simply let the truth settle on its own, the way it always does when it no longer needs permission to be seen. Another voice joined, sharper now, more certain. Not just the backer. A woman said, stepping slightly forward. Her firm manages the entire sponsorship portfolio. The sentence completed what the room had already begun to understand. This was not influence. This was control. The guard straightened slightly, his posture shifting from enforcement to awareness. The manager's earlier words replayed in his mind, not as authority, but as error. A visible one. A recorded one. Naomi glanced briefly toward the crowd, her gaze passing over the faces now filled with recognition, curiosity, and something else. Respect, forming in real time. Then she returned her attention to the manager. You asked me to leave, she said, her voice still even, still composed, but now carrying something deeper. Not anger. Not pride. Finality. He opened his mouth, but no immediate response came. Because anything he could say now would exist in the shadow of what had already been revealed. The list he trusted. The judgment he applied. The moment he chose to act. All of it stood in contrast to the reality now in front of him. We did not know, he managed, the words fragile, incomplete, lacking the certainty he had started with. Naomi held his gaze, not to challenge him, but to anchor the truth he was now facing. That is exactly the problem, she said. Around them, the room no longer questioned her presence. It adjusted to it, and in that adjustment, something irreversible had already taken place. For a brief moment, the rooftop disappeared. Not physically, but in the way noise fades when something deeper takes over. Naomi Carter stood there, but her eyes shifted slightly, not unfocused, not distracted, just distant. The present loosened its grip, and memory stepped in, quiet but undeniable. She was younger then, early 20s, standing outside a ballroom in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where success was supposed to be introduced, not questioned. She had prepared for that night with precision, every detail considered, every word rehearsed. And still, before she even made it past the entrance, a man in a tailored suit had looked at her the same way. Quick glance. Immediate judgment. This event is not open to the public, he had said, not asking, not verifying, deciding. She remembered the pause that followed. The moment where she could have argued, could have explained, could have pushed her way in. But she did not. Not because she lacked the right, but because she recognized something even then. It was not about that door. It was about the pattern behind it. She had walked away that night, not defeated, not broken, but focused. Focused on building something that would never require permission again. Something that would not rely on lists, or assumptions, or someone else deciding whether she belonged. The memory faded as quickly as it came, but it did not leave empty. It left clarity. The rooftop returned, sharper now, every detail more defined. The skyline, the lights, the faces watching her, all of it realigned around the truth that had already been revealed. Naomi's posture did not change, but her presence did. It settled deeper, stronger, like a foundation finally visible above ground. The manager shifted again, his earlier confidence now replaced with something closer to urgency. If we made a mistake, he began, the words careful, measured, we can correct it. The sentence sounded rehearsed, like something pulled from a script meant to contain damage. Naomi looked at him, not dismissing the words, but not accepting them either. You are still trying to fix the moment, she said quietly. I am addressing the system that created it. The distinction landed harder than anything else. Because it was not about one interaction. It never had been. Around them, the crowd listened differently now. Not as observers of a scene, but as witnesses to something larger unfolding. A man near the back lowered his phone slowly, no longer recording, just watching. A woman near the front nodded almost imperceptibly, as if recognizing a truth she had felt before but never heard spoken this clearly. Naomi's gaze moved briefly across the room, acknowledging nothing directly, but seeing everything. Then she returned to the manager one last time, her voice steady, grounded, undeniable. "You did not just question me," she said. "You confirmed exactly why this had to happen." And in that moment, it became clear to everyone present that what they had just witnessed was not a disruption. It was a correction. Naomi Carter did not raise her voice, but the shift in the room made it feel like something louder had just been spoken. The rooftop, once polished and controlled, now carried the weight of exposure. Every guest aware that they were no longer attending an event, but witnessing a turning point. Naomi reached for her phone again, not with urgency, but with intention, the same measured precision that had guided every move she made that night. She did not look down at the screen for long. She already knew what was happening on the other end. "Proceed to full withdrawal," she said calmly, her voice steady, each word deliberate. There was no hesitation in the response that came through. Only confirmation. Immediate. Final. Naomi lowered the phone once more, her gaze lifting to meet the space in front of her, not searching, not reacting, simply acknowledging what had now been set into motion beyond reversal. The manager stepped forward quickly this time, the last trace of his authority turning into urgency. "Wait," he said, his tone sharper than before, but no longer controlled. "You do not have to do this. We can fix this right now." The words came faster now, less polished, more exposed, as if he was trying to rebuild something that had already collapsed. Naomi looked at him, not dismissing him, but no longer engaging with the version of control he thought he still had. "You had your moment to fix it," she replied. "You chose not to." The sentence did not accuse. It clarified. Around them, the event continued to unravel in quiet, visible ways. Staff members near the entrance spoke into headsets with lowered voices, their expressions tight with confusion. A coordinator near the stage checked her tablet repeatedly, her hands slowing as the information on the screen stopped making sense. One by one, the systems that held the evening together were no longer responding the way they were designed to, because the foundation behind them had already been pulled. A man near the front turned to another guest, his voice no longer whispering. "Everything is being canceled," he said. Not paused. Canceled. The distinction landed heavily. This was not temporary. This was not recoverable. Naomi took a small step forward again, not to claim space, but because it was already hers. The guard moved further aside, no longer part of the barrier, now part of the audience. The manager stood still, his earlier certainty replaced entirely by realization. Naomi's eyes moved briefly across the room, taking in the faces that had watched her be questioned, dismissed, reduced to an assumption, and then watched that assumption collapse under the weight of truth. She turned back to him one last time, her voice calm, unwavering, and unmistakably final. "You thought removing me would protect this event," she said. "But all it did was show me exactly what needed to be removed." The words settled into the space with a clarity that no one could ignore. And in that moment, as the last remaining sponsor notification disappeared from the system, the entire rooftop understood something they would not forget. This was never about entry. It was about accountability. And it had just been enforced. The rooftop no longer belonged to the event. It belonged to the aftermath. The music had stopped completely now, not by announcement, but because no one remained to carry it. Conversations had dissolved into scattered fragments, unfinished sentences hanging in the air like evidence of a moment no one could fully process. Naomi Carter stood at the center of it all, not elevated, not separated, but unmistakably in control of what remained. The manager's shoulders lowered slightly, the last trace of resistance draining from his posture as reality settled in. He looked around again, slower this time, taking in the empty sponsor panels, the unsettled guests, the staff waiting without direction. For the first time, he was not managing anything. He was witnessing consequences. "There has to be a way to reverse this," he said, his voice quieter now, almost searching, as if the solution might still be somewhere within reach. Naomi did not respond immediately. She let the weight of the moment stand on its own, let the silence answer before she did. Then she spoke, calm and steady. "You are still thinking in terms of recovery," she said. "This is not a situation that resets." The words did not come with force, but they carried finality. Around them, guests began to step away, not in panic, but in quiet recognition that the event they had arrived for no longer existed. A woman near the exit paused, looking back once more at Naomi, her expression thoughtful, almost respectful, before she turned and walked out. Others followed, one by one, the crowd thinning without instruction, without direction, simply responding to what had already been decided. A coordinator approached the manager cautiously, holding a tablet that no longer displayed anything useful. "We have lost all sponsor support," she said softly, as if saying it louder would make it worse. "There is nothing left to present." The manager nodded slowly, the confirmation landing deeper than any speculation had. Naomi shifted her gaze briefly toward the skyline again, the city lights steady, unchanged, a reminder that systems rise and fall, but presence remains. Then she looked back at the manager, her expression composed, her voice grounded in certainty. "This was never about one event," she said. "It was about what you allowed to define it." He did not answer. He could not. Because the answer had already been exposed in every action that led to this moment. Naomi took one final step forward, not to assert power, but to close the distance that had once been used to exclude her. "You did not lose this tonight," she continued. "You revealed that it was already broken." The statement settled into the space with clarity, not as a judgment, but as a conclusion. The guards stood still, the staff silent, the guests nearly gone. The rooftop, once filled with status and expectation, now held only what remained after both had been stripped away. Naomi glanced once more at the now blank sponsor screens, then back at the man who had tried to remove her. 17 minutes, she said quietly, the number no longer a warning, but a record. That is all it took to show the truth. And as the last few guests made their way toward the exit, it became clear that nothing about this night would be remembered for what it was meant to be, only for what it revealed. The rooftop had emptied, but the weight of what happened remained, pressing into every corner of the space like something permanent. Naomi Carter stood where everything had shifted, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as the quiet center of a truth that had already settled. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the glass edges, indifferent to the collapse that had just taken place above them. The manager remained a few steps away, no longer trying to fix anything, no longer speaking. His silence now was different. It was not authority. It was realization. Around him, the staff moved slower, uncertain, waiting for direction that would never come. A coordinator closed her tablet gently, as if even that action required care now. The guard stepped further back, no longer positioned between Naomi and the space, but behind her, like everyone else. The shift was complete. Naomi glanced across the rooftop one more time, taking in what remained. The empty sponsor panels, the abandoned glasses, the quiet exit doors still swaying slightly from the last guests who had walked out. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just absence, the kind that speaks louder than anything else. She took a slow breath, steady and measured, then spoke again, not to reclaim power, but to define what had already been shown. "This is what happens," she said, her voice calm, carrying just enough to reach those still standing. "When image is protected more than integrity." The words did not challenge anyone. They explained everything. A staff member near the back lowered her gaze, the meaning landing in a way that felt personal, not procedural. Another nodded faintly, as if recognizing something they had seen before but never named. The manager finally looked up again, his voice quieter than it had ever been. "We were trying to maintain standards," he said, though even he seemed unsure of the statement as it left his mouth. Naomi met his gaze, not with resistance, but with clarity. "Standards are not measured by who you exclude," she replied. "They are revealed by how you treat people when you think they do not matter." The sentence settled into the space like a final line drawn across everything that had happened. No one interrupted. No one disagreed. Because there was nothing left to defend. Naomi turned slightly then, not walking away yet, just shifting her perspective toward the skyline once more. The night air moved softly across the rooftop, carrying away the last fragments of what the event was supposed to be. What remained was simpler, clearer, real. She looked back one last time, her presence still calm, still grounded, still undeniable. "You did not lose sponsors tonight," she said. "You lost credibility." The words landed without force, but with weight that could not be undone. The manager lowered his head slightly, not in defeat, but in understanding. Because for the first time, he saw it the way it actually was. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, a consequence. Naomi did not wait for anything else. She had already said what needed to be said. And as the final silence settled across the rooftop, it became clear that what she left behind was not just the end of an event, but the beginning of something that would not be ignored again. Naomi Carter turned slightly, her heels making a soft, deliberate sound against the rooftop floor, the only movement that seemed to carry certainty in a space that had lost all direction. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. The same people who had watched her be challenged now watched her leave without a word of resistance. That shift alone said more than anything spoken that night. Behind her, the manager remained still, as if moving too quickly might break whatever fragile understanding had finally reached him. A staff member approached him cautiously, holding a headset loosely in her hand. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice low, uncertain. It was a simple question, one that would normally be answered immediately, confidently, without hesitation. But tonight, there was no answer. Because the structure they relied on had not just failed. It had been exposed. Naomi paused for just a fraction of a second near the edge of the rooftop, not turning back, but not rushing forward either. The city stretched out below her, steady, unchanged, a reminder that power did not need to announce itself to exist. It simply needed to be real. She looked out over the skyline, her expression calm, grounded, untouched by the chaos behind her. For a moment, the noise of the event, the tension, the confrontation, all of it faded into something distant. Not forgotten, just placed exactly where it belonged. Behind her, the manager finally spoke again, not loudly, not with authority, but with something closer to honesty. "We misjudged you," he said, the words careful, almost heavy. Naomi did not turn around immediately. When she did, it was slow, controlled, her gaze steady, meeting his without anger, without satisfaction, just clarity. "No," she said. "You revealed yourselves." The distinction landed deeper than any apology could reach. Because it was not about her. It never had been. Around them, the remaining staff stood quietly, no longer pretending this was a normal night, no longer moving through routine. They were witnessing the end of something they had assumed was stable. Naomi took a step closer again, not to re-enter the space, but to finish what had already been said. "What happened here was not sudden," she continued, her voice even, unwavering. "It was built, moment by moment, every time someone decided who belonged without asking who they were." The words did not accuse any one person. They addressed something larger, something that had shaped the room long before she walked into it. The manager lowered his gaze slightly, not in shame, but in recognition. Because for the first time, he could see the pattern, not just the moment. Naomi let the silence settle one last time, letting it hold the weight of everything that had unfolded. Then she spoke again, softer now, but no less certain. "You do not fix something like this by inviting the right people in," she said. "You fix it by changing how you see them in the first place." No one responded. There was nothing left to add. Naomi turned again, this time fully, and began to walk toward the exit. Each step measured, unhurried, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. And as she reached the doorway, it became clear to everyone still standing that what they had witnessed was not just a collapse, but a reset that could not be undone. The door closed softly behind Naomi Carter, not with force, not with finality, but with quiet certainty. Inside, the rooftop remained suspended in the aftermath, a space that no longer belonged to what it once represented. Outside, the night carried on as if nothing had happened, the city lights steady, indifferent, but somehow more honest than the curated illusion she had just left behind. Naomi did not rush. She walked with the same measured pace she had entered with, her presence unchanged by the outcome, as if the result had never been in question. A black car waited at the curb below, engine running, the driver already stepping out to open the door, not out of urgency, but respect. She paused for a brief moment before stepping in, her gaze lifting once more toward the building above. Not to revisit what had happened, but to acknowledge it. Then she entered the car, and the door closed with a quiet click that carried more weight than anything spoken that night. Back on the rooftop, the silence lingered longer than expected. The manager stood where she had left him, his reflection faintly visible in the now darkened screens behind him. For the first time, he was not thinking about the event, the sponsors, or the logistics. He was thinking about the moment he made a decision without asking a question, and how quickly that decision had unraveled everything around him. A staff member slowly began clearing glasses from a nearby table, the small sound breaking the stillness just enough to remind everyone that time had not stopped, even if the room felt like it had. Another employee removed the remaining signage, each motion careful, almost symbolic, as if dismantling more than just a setup. No one gave instructions. No one needed to. The event was over in a way that could not be scheduled, could not be announced, could not be repaired. Outside, the car pulled away smoothly, merging into the flow of the city without hesitation. Naomi sat in silence, looking forward, not replaying the night, not questioning the outcome. She had seen that pattern too many times to doubt what needed to be done. Her phone vibrated once, then again. Updates. Confirmations. Final reports. She glanced at the screen briefly, then set it aside. Everything had been executed exactly as intended. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But out of clarity. The kind that comes when you understand that silence is not the absence of power, but the control of it. The city lights reflected softly against the window as the car moved forward, carrying her away from a place that had tried to define her before understanding her. And somewhere behind her, in a rooftop that would not be remembered for its elegance or exclusivity, a different kind of story had already taken hold. Not about who was removed, but about who never needed permission to be there in the first place. And long after the lights were turned off and the last trace of the event disappeared, one truth remained, quiet but undeniable. She did not need to prove she belonged. She became the reason the place no longer did.